Hi, welcome back to the Pilot's Lounge. Just as an add-on before we get started here, if I've been lucky to have been in kind of the golden age of flying where you go into a pilot's lounge and see retired and active airline captains that have been flying for 100 years, and corporate pilots and military pilots, and the stories they would tell would keep you laughing just right through the session while you were there. Some of them were kind of hairy stories about the experiences they've had, interesting stories, but those are gone now. Everything has become so, I want to say socialized. Pilots were social back then too. Okay, let's get started here in our version of the Pilot Lounge. Some years back, there's a tremendous storm going on, and the airport was closed, and the air traffic controllers in the control tower were sitting back having a cup of coffee. Then a voice boomed in, a loud voice, "Help, help, I'm caught above the overcast. You guys have to help get me down." And the head guy at the control tower puts his coffee cup down and says, "Okay, we're here to help you, but the first thing is don't yell into the radio." The guy says, "Who's got a radio?" That's one of the stories right out of the Pilot Lounge. There's another one that happened. It seemed like a lot of things happened at Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. There was a C-17, which is the biggest cargo airplane we have, and the second biggest in the world next to the Russian airplane. And the pilot there is a jokester. So he's taxiing out, and there's a little Cessna that belonged to the flying club there, and it's waiting its turn for takeoff, and this huge airplane comes up. He throttles his engines way back, and this C-17's got huge clamshell doors up in the nose that open like this. And when it opens up, it looks like a whale sitting there ready to eat a fish. So he comes up, he's not too far away from this little Cessna. He goes on to the ground control frequency and he says, "Hey, little guy, I'm going to eat you up." And I imagine the guy looked back and saw this huge opening. He probably got out of there in a hurry. Well, the story today is going back into aviation history again, into this area especially. And this story, I don't think this guy got the credit he should have gotten, but he tried real hard. William H. Martin. And he lived on a farm outside of Canton, Ohio. And the guy was an inventor also. And he would invent different things, and he invented model airplanes. And he also invented the first mono-wing airplane. Mono means it's a single wing airplane absolutely in the world. Nobody else had ever thought of it. So it was a single wing glider that he invented. And in 1908 rather, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. And he decided to fly it after he built it. And first, I'll back up a little bit, tell how he decided to build this airplane. His wife, Elmira, saw him. He was working on model airplanes, and that was his first love, building model airplanes. They called him the father of building model airplanes. And he actually built some model airplanes that had a rubber band and a propeller. And so he was the first one in aviation history to fly a powered airplane, even though it was powered by a rubber band. And he was kind of famous around the country for that. Then his wife says, "Why don't you," well, he was going to shows. And his wife finally told him, "Why don't you build that big airplane you've been thinking about, and we'll take it around. That way we'll sell more of your little models." So he did that. So he decided to take a first flight. This was in the wintertime. And he lived on a farm just east of Canton, and there was a slope on that farm. So they decided to use the slope for the test flight. And he and his sons, George, Fulburn, and Charles, were involved in helping him build this airplane. And they got it out of the barn, and it was on runners. It was a snow-filled gulch going down, and they got the farm horse, old Billy, out and tied a rope around his neck and to the airplane. And so they got on top of the hill, and they got old Billy going. He was going down the slope, and the glider was behind him and just rising. And then finally Billy decided he didn't like the idea, so he stopped at a fence. And then of course the airplane just settled down, but it flew 30 feet. That really encouraged him. So they worked it out so that they took the fence out so Billy would go further. And they flew, in fact his wife also on that day flew the airplane. And she's the first woman to ever fly a glider. And they never got the credit for this. You hear about the Wright brothers and all the rest of them, but very little about Mr. Martin. Anyway, he flew the airplane, and his wife got in it for the second flight, and she got it up to about 30 feet when they cut it loose from Billy, and it went 300 feet. So they knew they had something going for them. And the airplane is extremely stable. It was so stable that his wife flew it 8 times in one day. And then his granddaughter also set a record. An 8-year-old little gal flew the airplane 2 times. It was so stable. So the Wright brothers heard about it. They actually came up here to Canton to look at the single wing. They called it a mono wing then. And the controls he had. He had different controls from the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers airplane had 2 wings, had a lot of struts on it, and to turn the Wright brothers airplanes, you had to warp the wing. If you wanted to go to the right, you had warping meant they could actually bend the leading edge of the wing and take the wing down a bit, then it would turn to the right. They'd do the same thing going to the left. So this was really something around this area, but once again, he never got the credit that for starting first. He is the first man to fly a glider anywhere in the world. The first one for a single wing, mono wing glider. His wife was the first one to ever fly a glider. His granddaughter was the first and youngest ever to fly a glider. So that's what, he had a lot of firsts going for him. So they went around the country and they're towing the airplane, and they would go to shows, model shows, auto shows, merely to sell his model airplanes. And Henry Ford was at one. People all know of Henry Ford. And he actually gave him a Model T Ford, brand new one, so they could haul their airplane around the country, tow their airplane around the country. Well, he had a lot of success with it, and then his 3 sons flew it continuously. And it got a lot of attention, a lot of press and everything around this area and around Ohio, but then eclipsed by the Wright brothers. And here he had an airplane that even the Wright brothers came down to examine because of its stability. And it was so stable, that's why he let his wife and his granddaughter fly the airplane. Well, then he finally retired from that and donated it to the Smithsonian. Well, Lindbergh heard about it, and his airplane, the Spirit of St. Louis, was hanging from the ceiling at the Smithsonian. And he wanted the Martin glider to be hanging right next to his airplane. So that was a really something for that guy. He got a lot of attention then. But then in 1957, the people in the Smithsonian, well, it's an old airplane, we have other airplanes to put in there. So they put it into storage, and it started to just deteriorate. And finally, they gave it. In fact, the McKinley Science Center down in Canton wanted it. So a lot of paperwork and a lot of red tape and all, the Smithsonian finally donated it to them. It came in a 9-foot box, took it out, it was bad shape from deterioration. Well, they rebuilt the wings and all, but now the McKinley Science Center got real busy. And they had all kind of airplanes and other things, artifacts coming in. So they gave away the airplane in 2000, early 2004, I think it was, to the MAPS Museum down at the Akron Canton Airport, the west side of Akron Canton, the Military Aircraft Museum. And they've done a wonderful job down there. They've taken all kind of old military airplanes, rebuilt them, and it's one of the best attractions in all of Ohio, the Midwest. If you haven't been there, you haven't seen it, you go down there, it's just a wonderful place. So they took this old glider, Martin glider, and the team of guys down there, volunteers, they rebuilt it. And now it's hanging from the ceiling down at the Military Air Preservation Center. But it's just unusual how the aviation books, the historians all, have glossed over what Mr. Martin did. First, he created the model airplane business. And that's where he made a lot of money. Creating those little model airplanes that flew, and then he put, as I mentioned, a propeller with a driven by a rubber band. Nobody ever heard of that before. So they called him the father of model airplanes. And then when he went around the country showing his airplane and demonstrating, and it was just great then. And his sons took over, they flew the airplane, and they didn't do the promoting that their dad did. Anyway, that's where the airplane is right now. It's down at the MAPS, Military Air Preservation Society hangar on the west side of the Akron Canton Airport. They're open, they've got 40, 50, 60 airplanes that they've rebuilt. Beautiful airplanes. They look better than when they came out of the factory. And these volunteers out there, they're put in hundreds of hours. And they have a restoration shop. They've got everything from World War II airplanes all through, and they even have an A4 Skyhawk that was flown by one of the Blue Angels. He was from Akron, went to Firestone High School, went to the military academy, and then he became a pilot with the Blue Angels. And unfortunately, he crashed during a practice session. And 2 years ago, about 4 years ago, the MAPS got hold of this A4, and they had it redone, painted, and everything in the Blue Angels color scheme. And then they decided that, in fact, I went to the opening when they decided to open and have a big celebration. They invited his family, the deceased pilot's family, in from all over the world. Some came from Hong Kong. They had a wonderful celebration acknowledging the airplane and the pilot that was deceased. His whole family was brought in from everywhere. Then all of the pilots that he flew with and the Blue Angels were there. And they were all old and gray by then. And they each gave a bit of a talk. And they each said the thing was, they all told the other guys, I'm the best pilot in this bunch. And the other one would point and say, oh yeah, I'm the best pilot in this bunch. It was for fun, you know. And they told some stories about a very interesting thing. They've got an F-16 down there, an A4. In fact, an F-14, I meant to say. The F-14 was a Navy fighter that finally was obsolete, and was flown in with the backseater and the pilot. The backseater was a woman, a woman aviator in the Navy. She was a full lieutenant, and I guess when they parked the airplane, she got out, she packed it, went around, patted the airplane, and was crying that she's going to leave her baby there. So folks, if you have a chance, take a trip down to MAPS. It's well worth it. And they've got guides down there that really know about the airplanes. They will go around and they'll explain, and they have posters sitting by the airplanes that tell you when it was built, what it did, what war it fought in. In fact, there are two airplanes down there, the same models that I used to fly and buy from the military junkyard, not junkyard, boneyard, down in there, Tucson, Arizona. And one's a C-47. I bought mine back in the 1968 or so during the Vietnam War. And I paid $12,000 for the airplane. Airplane that cost many thousands of dollars for the government. So I want to thank you, taxpayers. Got the airplane, but I couldn't get it on a certificate because of a lot of regulations and opposition from airlines and all. So I finally sold it to a guy in Tucson, Arizona, Gordon Hamilton. He and his dad ran Hamilton Aircraft. And they took these old military airplanes out of the boneyard and had refurbished them and made them into military airplanes. And then sold them to the military, sold them back to the military. And so I sold it to him. And there's a story even behind that. And when the airplane sat for a while, and of course I'd start the engines up and keep those going. But when he came in, he had 3 or 4 mechanics in his airplane. They're going to look over the airplane and make it flyable. So that's what they did. But I warned them. I said, look it over real well, because the airplane's been sitting here for about 6 months, and we just run it up every so often. Say, no, we'll take it. We'll just run it up here, and then if it's okay, we'll fly it back to Arizona. What happened, about 1 month later, I got a call from a general, who, a real gruff guy, introduced himself as General so-and-so, the Scott Air Force Base. Out in Illinois, he said, I want you to get your, and he starts swearing at me, airplane off of my airport. If you don't get your airplane off my airport, I'm going to bulldoze it into a pile of junk. I said, what airplane? He said, that C-47, it's still in your name. What happened, I had given the title to a bank, a little bank I did with in a town, Oberlin, Ohio, and the guy went on vacation and never put the title through. So I actually owned the airplane it had a double engine failure. Both engines failed, that's unusual. And the pilot put it down, and there it sat on this Air Force base. And the general said, look, your airplane, your name's on the registration and all that. So I called Mr. Hamilton. I said, Gordon, we made a deal. He's, yeah, but you never sent me I said, well, look, here's what happened. But aren't you going to honor your deal? You said you'd buy it. I said I'd sell it to you. And I got he came up in a C-45, which was the trade deal. And I said, I got your airplane here. It's your airplane. So he finally calmed down, sent people up there. They changed the engines. Then they flew it out back to Tucson, and it became a gunship. One of the first gunships built for use in Vietnam. The gunship meant that they mounted machine guns on each side of the airplane from the cabin, and then the pilot could shoot those. And when they'd find a place where there were Viet Cong, and they could actually put one bullet in every square foot for a tremendous amount. That's why they called him, mine was called Snoopy. And you remember the song that was Puff the Magic Dragon? That's why the guys in Vietnam called it Puff the Magic Dragon. And that was the name of it. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for being with us again. But I'm going to bring you some more stories. And there's a bunch of them. And I often said that if some of these so-called big name stand-up comedians they wouldn't have to hire expensive writers. If they just go into a pilot's lounge and sit there for about 3 days, they'd get all the material they needed. Because these guys are funny. And the stories were true. At least I think they were true. Many of the stories I tell, I'm getting from those guys. But many of the stories I'm telling actually happened to me in what I call the golden age of aviation, where the man was better than the airplane. Now today the airplane is much better than the man. And thank you again for being with us.